So, in this lecture, you'll learn how to use the Python driver for a SQL server. So, this one will be a little bit more different than the one we looked at in the C#. It will be a bit more messy, but if you do have to use Python, you will know how to use SQL Server with it. So first of all, what we need to do is we need to import this thing called PYODBC. So Python ODBC. Now to do that, you write simply import and then you write PYODBC. That, and obviously you probably won't find it right away, so you need PYODBC. So if you don't find it, you need to go to these packages and actually find it, actually install it. Now, if you do have to program with Python, you should always use Visual Studio. It's free and it's the best tool you can find. You have all these environments, setups, everything is relatively quick compared to the other tools, and it's easy to set up. You simply install everything and it's all running. Now we need to find our importation, and that would be PyODBC, ODBC, I believe it's like that, and we have it. See, so we do actually have it installed already. We could raise that, upgraded it, but we won't do that. We don't need that. So let's move on, and what we will do, first of all, establish a connection. Then we will try to insert one value using our stored procedure that we had created before. And then we will simply retrieve all those values. So we won't be using a stored procedure in that case. We will just use a simple text query because it is a bit quicker that way. Usually it will be quicker that way, although you do have to be careful about pushing through those variables because various text-based attacks may happen. You can read about that as well. So let's start with the connection, and the connection string will be a bit different than what we had in C#. So let's do con equals pi ODBC, and then here we need to connect, and in the connect you simply enter the connection string. Now, so that we don't waste time and we don't get off the topic, I will simply copy my connection string and I will paste it in here. And we will go through it. So first of all, we have the driver. This is an unusual thing. You need to set the ODBC driver. So that is a sort of a general value that you would normally set, that you will always set. So that will be ODBC driver 17 for SQL Server, SQL Server. So you just copy that and you have it. It's all fine. And then, as usual, you have your data source. You have server in this case, so that's our local host IP, and then you have the port, of course, and then you have the instance. So let's move on to the database, and the database is test database 1 as usual, and then we have our user rather. So we have UID, which is obviously user ID, and we have languages user, and then we have PWD, which is password, and that is TST as we did before, and also you have trusted connection, yes. Just like we did before, the only real difference is the words, some of these words in here, and also the setting of the driver. Now let's do a new line. Let's do a new line here, a couple of new lines, and let's try to execute our stored procedure. So the way you do it, you simply write con and then you write execute. rather. Okay, so we have execute. And now we will need to insert the stored procedure. And then we will also need to insert our variables. So the way you do it, you actually have this comma separation like that. So it's like passing through two variables. And you close that up as well, just like that. And we will put in two variables. So if we go now to the Management Studio, we will take a look at our stored procedure. So we will be looking at the stored procedure, insert into test table. So let's click on modify. And as you can see, we have that name, and we also have two variables. We have txt and then deck variable. So we will try to pass them through. So let's copy this and let's get back to our Visual Studio. And we will need to insert that name, but first of all, we can insert some variables. So let's say, let's do py, that's Python test, let's do, and then the decimal, let's say is 14. It's not really a decimal, but it will work. Now the important part, and this is quite a bit difficult, quite complex. So you open these curly braces and then you write call. So you will be calling some certain procedure, stored procedure. And now let's insert that name. And you may say it's all finished, but it's not true. You need one very interesting thing. You need to open up these parentheses, and you can close it right away. And then you need to put in a question mark, separated, and another question mark. And as you can guess, this whole thing already stands for these two different variables. So it needs to read them like that, and then therefore it passes through to the procedure in the same order. So that's how you do the execution. But this is not all you need to do. After you do the whole execution, you actually need to commit. You need to commit. So you do commit like that. Actually, it's two M's. So you see, we'll be able to commit. You need to execute and then commit. And then you can use the connection for some other purposes, which we will now do. So what we will do, we will create a cursor from the connection. So let's do C equals con dot cursor. So you need that cursor to be able to retrieve some values. And now you will need to execute. So you need to write C execute. So you see, in the insertion, you execute from connection. However, in the retrieval, you execute through the cursor, not the connection, but you need to create the cursor variable and then you execute. So let's write our query. And it's gonna be a very simple one. It's gonna be a very, very simple one. So let's do select. ID, and then text test, and then deck test like that, from. And this is an interesting part. You could write test table, so we can try test table. It might be a bit complex sometimes. Usually this works perfectly. And let's do where text test equals our little py test, like that. So we will get all those values, or rather in this case we will only retrieve one value if everything goes right. It should only be one value here. So this is the execution part, but obviously that's not all. You need to actually read those things. So to do that, you need to fetch it. So let's do let's say R equals C fetch all. Fetch all, so you fetch them all of them values. And now you need to do for like that. So as you can see, I just double tabbed it. So I double clicked the tab key on my keyboard and those values were inserted automatically. It can be quite useful sometimes. So we will be going through VR, and we will be looking for rows. So let's write row. And then let's do, we don't need the pass. We need print. We need to print. So to print that, again, this is gonna be just a little console syntax. So let's do S and then again S, like that. So this basically states the variables in the string, and we will now declare those variables. And they will be the rows. So these will be the indexes of the rows. This is very important. You do row index, let's say 1, or rather let's do 1, and then let's do row 2. So we will get the text test and then also the deck test. We do get all three values with ID as well, but since we already wrote only declared these two variables here in the string, let's not bother with everything else. So this should work, and the important part to note here, you have to use indexes. You can't use the names, you have to use indexes. So let's try to run it. So you can save it and you simply click on this attach, and it should attach to everything and run it properly. So let's now give it a second to do. Let's see what happens. See if it runs through. And let's see, it has a little problem here. We have text test, so we are missing a letter, I believe. We are missing a letter here. Text test. So that is why you should use stored procedures. As you can see, when you write it all in the text, it can be quite confusing. And I actually made, as you can see, I missed the same letter in 2 places. So it is, again, very, very easy to make that little mistake. And now, as you can see, we had 2 unsuccessful retrievals. So we inserted the same thing 3 times, and now we had successful retrieval, and we were able to retrieve those 3 beautiful values. And with that, we will conclude this lecture.